Here is the sentence that tells you everything you need to know about where this conflict stands right now. The Israel Defense Forces have destroyed 300 of Iran's missile launchers. They have destroyed 80% of Iran's air defenses. 60% of its missile production capacity has been struck. Nearly 2,000 targets across Iranian territory have been hit by the combined military forces of the United States and Israel in what CENTCOM's own commander described as an operation double the scale of shock and awe. And yet, tonight, air raid sirens are sounding over Tel Aviv. Tonight, the skies above Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE, and Qatar are lit with interceptor contrails. Tonight, Iran launched another barrage, missiles and drones again, toward Israel, toward U.S. military bases, toward civilian airports, toward oil infrastructure, toward the arteries of the global economy. The weapons come smaller now, smaller salvos, more frequent, staggered by minutes rather than hours. The analysts are debating whether this shift represents a degraded Iranian capability or a deliberate tactical adaptation. But here is what is not debatable. They keep coming. Night after night, wave after wave, across the entire Gulf region simultaneously, Iran is still firing. And tonight, we are going to tell you exactly why Iran is still firing, what this new barrage pattern tells us about where this war is heading, and what it means that the most powerful military alliance in human history has spent billions of dollars and delivered thousands of strikes, and the barrages have not stopped. Something changed in the pattern of Iranian missile fire between the June 2025 12-day war and the current conflict, and understanding that change is essential to understanding what Iran is trying to accomplish with its latest barrages. In the June 2025 war, Iran's signature strike package was the mass salvo, a large, coordinated wave of dozens of missiles fired simultaneously from multiple launch platforms, converging on Israeli territory and overlapping arrival windows designed to overwhelm air defense systems through sheer volume. The largest single-day attacks in that conflict saw 70, 80, 90 missiles arriving within minutes of each other, forcing Arrow batteries and Patriot systems to engage multiple simultaneous tracks and making prioritization decisions at machine speed. In the current conflict, the pattern has shifted. The Times of Israel, drawing on Israeli military analysts and intelligence assessments, reported that Iran's launches since Operation Roaring Lion began have been notably different from previous rounds' large barrages. Attacks have been triggering alerts every hour or two. Sometimes launches targeting different parts of the country are staggered by just a few minutes. The volleys are smaller, but they are more constant. And they are no longer concentrated on Israel alone. Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Oman, Iraq. The current Iranian barrage campaign has targeted 8 countries simultaneously, every nation hosting American military personnel, every critical Gulf infrastructure node, every U.S. embassy compound in the region. Iran has forced 2 U.S. embassies to close. It has shut down Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest airport for international passengers. It has struck the Abu Dhabi airport, killing 1 person and wounding 7. It has sent missiles towards Saudi Arabia. It has launched drones toward Oman. The geographic scope of this campaign is not a desperate last gasp. It is a deliberate strategic expansion, spreading the defensive burden across an entire region rather than concentrating it on a single target. The analysts are divided on what this tactical shift means. The IDF and its aligned experts, including Behnam Ben Tailblue of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, argue that the smaller salvos reflect genuine degradation. Iran is struggling to coordinate large attacks because the Israeli Air Force has destroyed so many launchers and is actively hunting the remaining ones, making it difficult to mass sufficient hardware for the coordinated mass salvo operations Iran executed in June 2025. All the air activity over Iran designed to thwart missile launchers and hunt them makes it difficult for Iran to increase its launch rate. Israeli military analyst Giora Inbar told the Times of Israel, "Every launcher destroyed will not be replaced." But other analysts argue that the smaller, more frequent pattern is a deliberate tactical adaptation rather than a capability limitation, that Iran has concluded, based on the combat data from June 2025. That distributed smaller salvos arriving constantly are strategically more effective than periodic mass barrages, because they maintain the psychological pressure on civilian populations and the operational pressure on air defense crews continuously rather than in intermittent spikes. The truth, as is usually the case in active combat analysis, is probably some combination of both. On the first Saturday of the current conflict, Iran fired 137 missiles and 209 drones at the United Arab Emirates. 137 missiles, 209 drones. At the UAE, a country that had been conspicuously absent from the direct line of fire in previous rounds of the Iranian-Israeli conflict, a country whose gleaming towers and global financial infrastructure represent something that Iran, in this campaign, has clearly decided needs to be directly addressed. The results were seen and heard in places that no one watching this conflict's previous chapters would have expected. Fires and smoke visible from Dubai's Palm Jumeirah. Fires and smoke within sight of the Burj Al Arab, the iconic sail-shaped hotel that has become one of the most recognizable architectural symbols of Gulf prosperity and Western-aligned Gulf modernization. Dubai's airport, which processed 92 million passengers in 2023, making it the world's busiest for international travel, was forced to close. Emirates Airline, the carrier that more than any other institution has made Dubai a global hub, announced suspended and then restricted flight operations and urged customers not to travel to the airport unless their flights were confirmed. Nearly 25,000 of the roughly 44,000 flights scheduled to operate across the Middle East between the start of the conflict and March 5th were canceled. 25,000 flights. The air traffic disruption alone represents an economic cost measured in billions: aircraft repositioning, passenger compensation, cargo rerouting, insurance premium adjustments, business travel cancellation, tourist deterrence. And that is before accounting for the direct economic impact of the strikes on industrial facilities, port operations, and financial market confidence. At Abu Dhabi's airport, an Iranian strike killed 1 person and wounded 7. The industrial zone in Fujairah, a UAE emirate on the Gulf of Oman coast, hosting oil storage facilities that serve as a critical fuel bunker and loading point for maritime traffic rounding the Arabian Peninsula, was struck by drones. Smoke rising from Fujairah is not just visible evidence of Iranian aggression. It is a direct threat to the maritime fuel supply chain that keeps a significant fraction of global shipping operational. Iran struck the UAE not because it expected to destroy it militarily. Iran struck the UAE because it is demonstrating that American security guarantees, the implicit promise that U.S. military presence in the Gulf protects its host nations from this kind of attack, do not fully deliver on that promise even when the United States is prosecuting the largest air campaign in 20 years. The geographic expansion of Iran's Barrage campaign in the current conflict represents a strategic evolution that deserves its own analysis, separate from the specifics of any individual country or target. In every previous round of direct Iranian military action, the April 2024 strike, the October 2024 strike, the June 2025 12-day war, Iran's direct fire was concentrated primarily on Israel. The proxy forces handled the Gulf. Hezbollah struck from Lebanon. Houthi forces struck from Yemen. Iraqi militias harassed U.S. bases. Iran itself fired at Israel. The division of labor was somewhat maintained. That division has now been deliberately collapsed. Iran is simultaneously firing ballistic missiles at Israel while firing ballistic missiles and drones at Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Iraq. The Critical Threats Project at the American Enterprise Institute noted that Iran's expansion of the war to the Gulf region has increased the number of air defense systems Iran must attrit, while simultaneously Iran continues to lose missile launchers. A seemingly paradoxical strategy that only makes sense if Iran's goal is not to preserve its missiles, but to maximize the defensive burden placed on the entire U.S. allied network before those missiles are depleted or destroyed. And it is working as a burden maximization strategy. Qatar's air defense system intercepted 101 ballistic missiles in the early phase of the conflict. Kuwait's army activated its air defenses against multiple separate attack packages. Bahrain, home to the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, was under sustained missile threat. Saudi Arabia reported intercepts above its territory. Jordan, which sits between Iran and Israel geographically, was intercepting missiles passing over its airspace. Every single one of those intercepts consumed an interceptor missile. Every single interceptor consumed is one fewer available for the next wave, and the next wave after that, and the wave after that. The IDF assessed on March 3rd that the combined U.S.-Israeli force had destroyed around 300 Iranian missile launchers. The IDF also noted that Iran had fired over 100 drones at Israel since the conflict began, all of which were intercepted. 2 U.S. embassies had closed in the region due to security threats. The geometry of this campaign, Iran dispersing its fire across 8 countries, forcing 8 separate national air defense systems to simultaneously engage, is not the behavior of a military on the verge of strategic collapse. It is the behavior of a military executing a doctrine of maximum regional burden distribution designed to exhaust the entire U.S. allied defensive network as rapidly as possible. One of the most consequential and least appreciated aspects of this conflict is the speed with which Iran has demonstrated the capacity to analyze its own performance and adapt its tactics in near real time. The June 2025 12-day war provided Iran's military planners with an enormous data set. They saw which missiles were intercepted and which got through. They saw at what altitudes and approach angles Iranian missiles were most vulnerable. They saw which launch positions were quickly identified and targeted by Israeli F-35s and American B-52s. They saw which types of coordinated salvos most effectively stressed the air defense network. And they incorporated all of that data into the operational doctrine for the current conflict. The staggering of launches, multiple small salvos timed minutes apart rather than single large coordinated waves, reflects this learning. A large coordinated wave is detectable in the launch phase by satellite and radar, giving defenders maximum warning time to prepare. Small, sequentially staggered launches are harder to aggregate into a coherent threat picture in the critical minutes between launch detection and arrival. Each small salvo triggers air raid sirens independently, requiring civilians to shelter repeatedly rather than once, maintaining the psychological disruption at lower missile expenditure per disruption event. The geographic distribution across 8 countries reflects learning from June 2025's concentrated on Israel approach. When all fire is directed at a single country, that country's full defensive capacity, plus allied assistance from the US, Jordan, and France, can be concentrated against the threat. When fire is distributed across 8 countries simultaneously, each country can only use its own assets plus whatever fraction of allied support can be shared across multiple simultaneous engagements. Ben Tilblue of FDD made a particularly significant observation in his Times of Israel analysis. The Israelis and the Americans are now destroying the facilities that exist on the western side of Iran, which are the ones that allow them to strike furthest west. Iran's response to this systematic destruction of its westernmost launch infrastructure has been to adapt its launch positions, using eastward position launchers that have longer range requirements, potentially accepting reduced payload or less precise targeting in exchange for survivability of the launch platform. An adaptive adversary, a learning organization, an enemy that studies its defeats and changes. This is what makes Iran's barrages more than a simple attrition problem for American planners. The missiles are not just a numbers problem. They are a strategic intelligence problem. Here is what I want you to carry with you from tonight's analysis. Because the phrase, Iran launches new barrage of missiles and drones, is going to appear in headlines tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. The word new will keep appearing. New barrage, another barrage, fresh barrage. And the risk, the very real risk, is that the repetition numbs us to what is actually happening. What is actually happening is this. The United States and Israel have conducted the most intense combined air campaign since the 2003 Iraq invasion against a country that has spent 30 years specifically preparing for exactly this scenario. They have struck nearly 2,000 targets. They have destroyed 80% of Iran's air defenses. They have killed Iran's supreme leader. They have targeted its nuclear program, its missile production, its naval forces, its command infrastructure. And Iran is still firing. Tonight, Iran fired at Kuwait, at Bahrain, at the UAE, at Qatar, at Israel, simultaneously. Smaller salvos, yes. More distributed, yes. Tactically adapted from the mass barrages of June 2025, yes. But firing, still firing. The barrage is not a sign of strength in the traditional sense. Iran is not winning this conflict on the battlefield. Its air defenses are in ruins. Its launchers are being hunted every night by Israeli F-35s and American V-2s. Its nuclear program has been struck. Its supreme leader is dead. But it is demonstrating something that no battlefield metric fully captures: the strategic significance of the refusal to stop. The political, psychological, and operational cost of an adversary that keeps firing regardless of what is done to it is not measured in sorties or launcher counts or interceptor expenditure alone. It is measured in the question that gets harder to answer with every new barrage: what does it actually take to make this stop? That is the question the United States and Israel are paying billions of dollars per day to try to answer. And tonight, with the sirens sounding over Tel Aviv and the interceptors lighting up the Gulf sky again, that question does not yet have an answer. Stay with us, because the barrages will keep coming, and we will keep explaining what they mean.